Part 2, 1985 to 1996. You never achieve what you want without falling on your face a few times. The years after Steve left Apple were among the toughest of his career, and the most formative. Determined to build a new great computer company, he started next with several members of the Macintosh team. We will make a whole bunch of mistakes, but at least they will be new and creative ones, he predicted. Around the same time, Steve invested $10 million in a small company called Pixar. It was a tiny computer graphics operation, newly spun off from filmmaker George Lucas' empire. The technical expertise at Pixar attracted Steve. Its initial product was a high-end graphics computer that cost more than $100,000. Both Next and Pixar quickly ran into trouble. The Next computer system, which debuted in 1988, was powerful and packed with the humanistic touches Steve loved. It was visually striking and intuitive to use, with high-quality audio and the complete works of Shakespeare built in. But it was also late to market and expensive, and it sold poorly. Within 6 years of Next launch, the entire founding team, other than Steve, had resigned. Pixar, meanwhile, was eking out an existence selling computers and software, and later, animating commercials. The company was also making award-winning short films that charmed Steve. This use of technology in service of brilliant storytelling embodied one of his favorite things: work at the intersection of technology and the liberal arts. The short films fired Steve enthusiasm and kept him writing check after check to Pixar, ultimately investing some $60 million. But the films were, as Steve put it, in the background, not the company focus. He described Pixar's early business strategy as find a way to pay the bills, and he later speculated that the only reason the company did not fall apart then was that the leadership team would all get depressed. But not all of us at once. If at times in these years he seemed disappointed by the possibilities of technology. This stuff does not change the world. It really does not, he told a reporter in an uncharacteristic flash of pessimism. His world was also expanding beyond his work. He treasured his privacy, saying of his public persona, "I think of it as my well-known twin brother. It is not me." Steve learned how to hone a company to its essence, even when it was painful. He shifted Next focus to selling software. The shift meant closing a factory and laying off more than 200 of Next 530 employees. Meanwhile, Pixar stripped away its advertising and hardware businesses and entered into an agreement with Disney, all to pursue what sometimes seemed an impossible dream: to make fully computer-animated feature films. After nearly a decade of difficulty, the streamlined Next and Pixar both transformed into unlikely success stories. At the end of 1995, Pixar premiered Toy Story in the same month it held its initial public offering. A year later, Apple, in need of operating system software, bought Next for $427 million. If you really look closely, Steve liked to say, most overnight successes took a long time. Steve on starting Next. A few weeks after starting Next, Steve spoke with Newsweek about the original insight for the company.
I had been reading some biochemistry, recombinant DNA literature. I had recently met Paul Berg, the inventor of some of the recombinant techniques. I called him up and said, "You remember me? I'm ignorant about this stuff, but I've got a bunch of questions about how it works and I'd love to have lunch with you." So we had lunch at Stanford. He was showing me how they were doing gene repairing. Actually, it's straightforward. It's kind of neat. It smells a lot like some of the concepts you find in computer science. He was explaining how he does experiments in a wet laboratory, and they take a week or 2 or 3 to run. I asked him, "Why don't you simulate these on a computer? Not only will it allow you to run your experiments faster, but someday Every freshman microbiology student in the country can play with the Paul Berg recombinant software. So his eyes lit up. And that was sort of a landmark lunch, because that's when I started to really think about this stuff and get my wheels turning again.
On becoming majority shareholder in Pixar in 1996, the year after Pixar released Toy Story and held its initial public offering, Steve looked back on the work and ideas that first drew him to the company.
I met Ed Catmull, who was running the computer division of Lucasfilm. In 1985, I'd been involved in graphics most of my life. The Apple II, though most people don't remember, was the first real color computer that you could get your hands on. The Macintosh, obviously, was graphics. The LaserWriter was graphics. But it was all two-dimensional. We'd done some three-dimensional work at Apple, and I was certainly aware of the field. But the stuff that Ed and his team were doing was way ahead of anything I'd ever seen anyone do.
On Pixar's early days, in 2003, with Disney and Pixar deep in negotiations over the future of the studio, Steve told filmmaker Leslie Iwerks about Pixar's start.
Our strategy in the early days of Pixar was to find a way to pay the bills. In the background, we were developing animation software, and John Lasseter was making the succession of short films on the way to Toy Story, but we were trying to pay the bills and just buy time. That strategy really turned out not to work. Probably, if you look back in the rearview mirror, we would have been better off just funding the animation efforts and not trying to pay the bills through these other products, such as the Pixar image computer and software. But that was our best attempt to try to keep the company going. In the end, I just ended up writing checks to keep the company going. And that basically went on for 10 years. You could see there was magic in a Pixar animated short film. Right from the beginning. With the rest of Pixar's technology, you had to be an expert to understand it. But you didn't have to know anything about the technology to enjoy the film. It was incredibly refreshing and really pointed the way to where we wanted to go. We didn't want to have to convince people that our technology was great. We knew it was great. We wanted to use our technology to make something where nobody needed to know anything about the technology to love it. And that's what we ended up doing. Next memo, dated March 17th, 1986 CO. Our company is founded on the principle that a few good people can produce a tremendous product if they are not fettered by having to convince a larger organization of what they know is right. And B, if they can devote their personal time to designing, marketing, or what have you, rather than managing others to do these tasks less well. To stay true to this principle, I propose the following two ideas. One, we all need time for uninterrupted individual work. Meetings, vendors, are eating into our individual time, and the productivity of our engineers is suffering. I propose we set aside every Thursday as a day with no meetings of any kind. Thursday is our day, a day when we metaphorically lock the doors to the outside world and quietly work individually. Two, in revising our headcount requirements and subsequently budgets, downwards you to remember. Thou encourage you to remember that there's a very subtle line, causes you to be a manager instead of a contributor or team leader. I believe that if we turn ourselves into managers instead of doers, both our schedule and the greatness of our product will suffer. Let's not let this happen. It is better to have fewer people, even if it means doing less. Let's build our company slowly and carefully. Let's discuss these two ideas at our staff meeting tomorrow. Thanks, Steve Jobs. Pixar led the way. Steve Jobs to next subject. A great day and a half date, March 30th, 1989, 8:08 p.m. Well, we did it again. Congrats to all for a real team effort. And Pixar did it too. For those of you who didn't see the Academy Awards last night, Pixar won an award in the category of short animated films, or their computer-generated film, Tin Toy. Tin Toy is the first computer-generated film to ever win an award, and it was competing against several very good, traditionally animated, non-computer animated films. The computer graphics industry just achieved a major milestone.
Speech at Reed College. Character is built not in good times, but in bad times. When Steve welcomed the incoming class of freshmen at his alma mater, Reed College, on August 27, 1991, NeXT computers were not selling well, and Pixar had just experienced a round of layoffs.
Thank you very much for this. It means a lot to me. I'm a peculiar Reed alumnus. As many of you know, I never graduated from Reed, although that doesn't make me that unusual, I suppose. But maybe more unusual, I ran out of money after one semester here at Reed, so I dropped out. But then I dropped in for another year and a half, so I was actually here by choice, which is somewhat more unusual. And I had some experiences here. Experiences I'm sure many of you will have as freshmen and throughout your years here that have stayed with me my whole life. I was thinking of some of those experiences to recount to you. Remember that I'm much older than you now. I've always thought that people's spark of self-consciousness turns on at about 15 or 16. So if we normalize age to 15 or 16, then most of you are too old, or 3 or 4 years old here as freshmen, about 20. So maybe that puts into perspective what it's like to return to Reed after so many years. But a few things stick in my mind that I wanted to pass on that maybe could be of some value. The first was that, as you will be shortly, I was forced to go to humanities lectures. It seemed like every day. I studied Shakespeare with Professor Satowski at the time. I thought these were meaningless and even somewhat cruel endeavors to be put through. I can assure you that as the patina of time takes its toll, I thank God that I had these experiences here. It has helped me in everything I've ever done, although I wouldn't have ever guessed it at the time. The second experience that I remember from Reed is being hungry all the time. The cafeteria here taught me quickly to be a vegetarian. I didn't have so much money, so I would gather up Coke bottles and take them up to the store to figure out how to eat. I discovered the cheapest way to eat was Roman meal. Have you ever heard of this? It's surreal. It was invented by a Harvard professor, history professor, who one day wondered what the Roman legion took with them to eat as they conquered and pillaged villages. He found out through his research that it was Roman meal, and you can buy it at the local store. And it's the cheapest way to live. So I lived for many months on Roman meal. But also, several of us, after not eating for a few days, would hitchhike across town to the Hare Krishna temple on Sundays, where they would feed all comers. Through practice, we discovered just the right moment to arrive. After their religious practices, and right before the food, and not having eaten for days, we would eat a lot. On several occasions, we would stay over because we were not able to move the following morning, because it was their time to gather flowers for their temple to honor Krishna. So they would take us with them, pre-dawn, out into the neighborhood, where they would proceed to steal flowers from the neighbors. The neighbors close to the Hare Krishna temple soon grew wise to their pillage and would get up early to guard their flower beds. So the Krishnas had to go in an ever wider circumference around the temple. In spending a little time with these people, I noticed some of their other behaviors. They used to sell incense to the local department stores and then go steal it back. So the department stores would buy more, and their ethics told them this was fine, that anything in the service of Krishna was fine. In interacting with them, I think I learned more about situational ethics than I ever did on campus. The last experience I wanted to recount for you. There's a man, I think he's here today, named Jack Dudman, who used to be the dean of the school. He was one of the heroes of my life while I was here, because Jack Dudman looked the other way when I was staying on campus without paying. He looked the other way when I was taking classes without being a formal student, or paying the tuition, and oftentimes, when I was at the end of my rope, Jack would go for a walk with me. I would discover a $20 bill in my tattered coat pocket after that, with no mention of it from Jack. Before, during, or after, I learned more about generosity from Jack Dudman than I learned anywhere else in my life. So I wanted to, because the things I learned here have stayed with me. Character is built not in good times, but in bad times, and not in a time of plenty, but in a time of adversity. And this school seems to manage to nurture that spirit of adversity, and I think it does build some character. So I thank you for teaching me how to be hungry, and how to keep that with me my whole life. Thank you very much.
Email exchange between Steve, Intel CEO Andy Grove, and an Intel engineer. I have changed my position 180 degrees. As Pixar became a leader in graphics, Steve and his mentor, Intel CEO Andy Grove, discussed how Intel might learn from Pixar. When an Intel engineer tried to follow up, Steve resisted.
From Engineer 1 at Intel to Steve Jobs CC, Andy Grove Subject, Pixar, 3D Graphics Date, September 22nd, 1995, 2:04 p.m. Steve, Andy asked me to look into what we should do in dramatically improving the Intel architecture platform's 3D graphics performance. He indicated that you and key people at Pixar, like Ed Catmull, have lots of good ideas on what we should do in this area. I actually contacted Ed several months ago, but he was really busy and cannot commit to meeting until after September. As you know, I am in charge of microprocessors at Intel. I have located several key Intel 3D experts. One of them, Engineer 2, came from Sun over a year ago. I would like to have a meeting at next Intel or Pixar with you, Catmull, and others, along with me and our graphics experts, to discuss your ideas and map out what our action plans are. I am in Tokyo next week, but will be back in my office on Monday, October 2nd. I will ask my admin to contact your office to set that meeting up. Thanks, Engineer 1.
From Steve Jobs to Engineer 1 at Intel A, Subject, Pixar 3D Graphics 8. Date, September 23rd, 1995. A 7:11 p.95. Engineer where Pixar does indeed possess the knowledge to enable Intel's processors to render 3D graphics with much higher performance and quality. These secrets could absolutely make their way into future Intel general purpose processor hardware. We believe this single capability is the key for Intel to dramatically expand the personal computer market share in the consumer space by significantly surpassing the graphics capabilities of dedicated gaming machines like Sega, the Nintendo, and PlayStation. Pixar's secrets were developed through significant investment over 10 years or more. And we value them highly. Even without these secrets implemented directly into the processor, Pixar can maintain a strong competitive advantage by implementing them in software. By revealing the correct way to achieve high quality, high performance graphics CR, Pixar risks losing much of this advantage to competitors with no effort required on their part. Hence, There is a need for compensation. What does Intel propose to give Pixar in exchange for disclosing and licensing its secrets to Intel?
From Engineer 1 at Intel to Steve Jobs, copied to Andy Grove, subject, reply, Pixar, 3D graphics, date September 25th, 1995, at 11:20, 2 a.m. Steve, we would very much like to have our meeting, but I will put that on hold based on your input. We talked to many key people about ideas to improve the microprocessor capability, with the aim of benefiting the whole industry so that everyone will gain. We have not entered into any financial arrangement in exchange for good ideas for our microprocessors in the past, and we have no intention of doing so in the future. Engineer 1.
From Steve Jobs to Engineer 1 at Intel A, copied to Andy Grove, subject, reply to Pixar, September 25th, 1995, at 5:29 p.m. This method hasn't worked well for you in the past, as shown by Intel's poor graphics designs and performance. Perhaps you should consider a new approach for the future. Steve. From Steve Jobs to Andy Grove. Subject. Reply, Pixar 3D graphics. Date, September 25th, 1995. 1995, But I find Engineer 1's approach extremely arrogant, given Intel's, or perhaps his, dismal record in understanding computer graphics architectural issues in the past. If I were going to produce hundreds of millions of something, I would absolutely be willing to pay for the best advice money could buy. Anyway, this isn't a sales pitch. I just wanted you to know what I thought. As always, best, Steve.
From Andy Grove to Steve Jobs, subject, reply number 2, Pixar, 3D graphics, date September 26th, 1995, at 3:12 p.m. Steve, I am firmly on Engineer 1's side on this matter. He has taken your offer to help us very seriously, gathered the best technical people, and was ready to proceed. Then, you introduced a completely new element into the discussion, money. You and I have talked about this topic many times, and not once did you suggest or hint that this would be a commercial exchange. I understood your offer as an offer of help, not as a proposal for a business transaction. You may recall that, on occasion, I offered you suggestions related to your business. For instance, porting Next Step to the 486 processor, which was beneficial to us as well, or my presentation to your team on repositioning Next Step. I'm not claiming that these examples are equivalent in value to your expertise in graphics, but I gave what I had, put thought into the challenges you were facing, and it never occurred to me to charge for it. In my view, that's what friendly companies and friends do for one another over time. These things tend to balance out. I am sorry you don't see it that way. Both Intel and the industry will be worse off as a result. Regards, Andy.
From Steve Jobs to Andy Grove, subject. Reply number 2, Pixar 3D graphics, date, October 1st, 1995, at 3:50 p.m. I have many faults, but ingratitude is not one of them. I also agree with you that in the long run, these things balance out. For that reason, I have completely changed my position. We will freely help Engineer 1 make Intel's processors much better for 3D graphics. Please ask Engineer 1 to call me, and we will arrange a meeting as soon as the appropriate Pixar technical team can be freed up from their work on the film. Thanks for giving me a clearer perspective. Steve. Email to Pixar employees, to 175 million and beyond. From Steve Jobs to Pixar team. Subject, Toy Story crosses $150 million. Date, January 2nd, 1996. At 9:30 a.m. yesterday, Toy Story crossed $150 million in domestic box office receipts. Like 13 days after surpassing 100 million, Toy Story was the undisputed blockbuster of the holiday season, outperforming all other films, including Jumanji, Father of the Bride 2, Waiting to Exhale, and of course Balto. It's possible that Toy Story may even surpass the 1995 box office leaders, Batman Forever at $184 million, and Apollo 13 at $172 million, to become the most successful film of 1995. To become the most successful film of Ready become the third most successful animated feature film of all time, surpassing all of Disney's classics, except Aladdin, at $217 million, and The Lion King at $312 million, to $175 million and beyond. Congratulations, team. Steve, from Steve Jobs to next colleagues. Subject, White House. Date, April 2nd, 1996 at 4:17 p.m. me. I am sending you this email. I'm the White House.
So how do you think that the web might change in the near future with the help of the type of software that you are producing now?
I think most large companies and medium-sized companies and even small companies are starting to look at the web as the ultimate direct-to-customer distribution channel, bypassing all middlemen, going directly from the supplier to the consumer. And that's a pretty powerful concept when you think about it. One of the things that I love is that, a very small company, if they invest a lot in their website, can look just as formidable and just as solid on the web as a very large company can. As a matter of fact, some of the smaller companies are more hip on the web, getting more hip to the web sooner, and so they actually look better than some of the large companies do right now. And it's going to be this very leveling phenomenon. But I think a tremendous amount of goods and services is going to be sold, or at least the demand created for such things, over the web.
What else do you see in the near future for the web besides the ability to shop in a more kind of complete way through the web?
It's not just shopping for goods and services, it's shopping for information. I mean, you're going to find out already, when I want to find out the movies that are playing around Silicon Valley, I just go up on the local web page and check it out. It's a lot faster than going to the theater, going to the newspaper, and a lot faster than calling the theaters, etc. And more we're shopping for information on the web. I just recently bought a Sony, one of the new Sony camcorders, and I went on Sony's webpage and I found out all about the ones they offer and picked the one I wanted right from that webpage before I even called a store, to try to find it physically. I basically, the demand to get me to buy that thing was created from Sony's webpage. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. You're going to be buying information, or finding information and really making a lot of decisions about what you're going to do with your life or what you're going to purchase from the web.
Is the whole idea of going to the store to buy software going to become obsolete too? Do you think we'll be downloading our software from the web?
Of course. Yeah, there's no question about it. There's no question that will happen, and I think it'll happen in the next 24 months. There's some software right now that's still very large, and the web on-ramps and off-ramps to corporations are now very fast, but the off-ramps to the consumers' homes are still not so fast. And so for buying large software such as CD-ROM games and stuff, they'll still be distributed on physical media for a while. But when the off-ramps to the consumer get faster, possibly with cable modems in the near future, then that could possibly go fully electronic as well.
So tell me what else you see for the web beyond the world of retail.
Yeah, it's not... there's a lot of things happening with the web right now in terms of allowing people access to information that they would just never have before, and what this does is, of course, it lets special interest groups get together. So, you have, I know people who have had, as an example, a stroke and have gotten on the web and found that there are several web pages now devoted to information for stroke victims, where they can learn about, some of the latest treatments, they can learn about avoidance, the latest in avoidance advice and things like that. And those things didn't exist before as well.
Steve Jobs is my guest. You started off in the business of designing computers. When did you start thinking that the future wasn't in building the individual computers, but rather in the computer network? I mean, because after all, what you're doing now is designing software for the web.
Right. I had sort of a landmark visit to Xerox PARC in 1979. That's Palo Alto Research Center, where they invented a lot of the cornerstones of the modern graphical user interface. And actually, they showed me what they were doing in 1979. And actually, they'd done three things. The first was the brilliant work they had done on graphical user interfaces. And the second was networking. They had over 100 of their computers at that time networked in a fully electronic environment using email routinely. And the third thing that they'd done was object-oriented programming. They'd invented Smalltalk and other object-oriented languages as well. And I was so blinded by the brilliance of the first, the graphical user interface, that I didn't even see the other two in 1979. And so when we went to make the Macintosh, it really completed the job that they had started on the graphical user interface, but really did not address object-oriented technology, nor did it address networking.
Let's define our terms. The graphic user interface, you're talking about like icons on the computer?
Yeah, using plain English in menus, icons, drag and drop, all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. And the objects that you're talking about.
Object-oriented programming is a technology that is sort of like, it brings to software what the Industrial Revolution brought to the production of hard goods, which is reusable parts. The way software is built today is the same way it was built when it was invented, if you will, 50 years ago. Everything is custom. And what object-oriented technology lets you do is start to build software in a much more modern way with reusable components. And you end up being able to build software about 10 times faster. And it's slowly starting to seep into the software culture. And I think it's an unstoppable trend.
And this is what you're in the business of now.
What Next does is Next works on object-oriented software and has just launched a bunch of web products which incorporate object-oriented software, bringing that technology to the web as well.
Now, when you started Next, your goal was to make a new kind of computer, but that computer failed on the market.
That's right.
Did that failure help lead you in the direction of working more toward the web, toward web-oriented software?
When we started Next, I guess have to take credit for this, made a mistake that I don't think is terribly uncommon, which is you leave something where you were pretty successful, and the next thing you do, you try to copy a lot of the paradigms of success that worked the last time, and don't realize that the world is changing from underneath your feet. And that's what we did at Next. We made a really great computer, but the world had changed enough to where the door to establish a new hardware company really had closed. Even before we started the company, we just didn't know that at the time. Fortunately, the software that we built for this computer was so far ahead of its time that even after we exited the hardware business and became a software company, we were still 5 years ahead of anybody else. And so as Next became a software company, we really had something that a lot of people wanted.
My guest is Stephen Jobs. We'll talk more after a break. This is Fresh Air. Stephen Jobs is my guest, co-founder of Apple Computer, now the chairman of Next Computer Incorporated, and also the head of Pixar Studios, which made Toy Story. What was the very first computer you had?
I was very lucky. I was born in San Francisco, and I grew up in Silicon Valley. And I was able to go to NASA, Ames Research Center nearby, and play with a time-sharing computer, which was a loud mechanical terminal hooked up with a wire somewhere, and there was supposedly a computer on the other end of it. And I got a chance to program in Fortran and BASIC, and
those are the computer languages of the time.
The computer languages of the time, and I was captured by it.
And how did you get into the computer business? What made you think, this is going to be my life?
Well, I met my future partner in Apple, Steve Wozniak, when I was about 13 years old, and he was the first person I'd met that knew more about electronics and computers than I did at the time. And we became fast friends and started to build electronic devices together. We built blue boxes together for a while, which were little devices that could allow you to make free phone calls everywhere, illegally, I might add. And
oh, so you were a hacker?
Yeah, yeah. We built the first digital blue box in the whole world. It was wonderful. We had our tagline, which we put a little card in the bottom of each one, was "He's got the whole world in his hand." And the reason we built a computer was that we wanted one and we couldn't afford one. We couldn't afford to buy one. There were thousands of dollars at that time. We were just two teenagers, and so we started trying to build them, and scrounging parts around Silicon Valley where we could. And after a few attempts, we managed to put together something that was the Apple I, and all of our friends wanted them too. They wanted to build them, so. It turned out that it took maybe 50 hours to build one of these things by hand. And it was taking up all of our spare time because our friends were not that skilled at building them, so Woz and I were building them for them. And we thought, if we could just get what's called a printed circuit board where you could kind of just plug in the parts instead of having to hand wire the whole thing, we could cut the assembly time down from maybe 50 hours to more like an hour. And so Woz sold his HP calculator and I sold my VW microbus, and we got enough money together to pay someone to design one of these printed circuit boards for us. And our goal was to just sell them as raw printed circuit boards to our friends and make enough money to recoup our calculator and transportation. And what happened was that one of the early computers, matter of fact, the first computer store in the world, which was in Mountain View at the time, said, well, I'll take 50 of these computers, but I want them fully assembled, which was a twist that we'd never thought of. So we went and bought the parts to build 100 computers, and we built 50 of them and delivered them, and then we got paid in cash and ran back and paid the people that sold us parts for the parts. And we had the classic Marxian profit realization crisis, which was our profit wasn't liquid, it was in 50 computers sitting on the floor. So we decided we had to start learning about sales and distribution so that we could sell the 50 computers and get back our money. And that's how we got into business. And we took our idea to a few companies, one where Woz worked and one where I worked at the time, and neither one was interested in pursuing it, so we started our own company.
Now, you led the team that created the Macintosh, and from what I've read, it sounds like you were really the advocate for having a mouse on the Mac. Why did you push for that, and what was the argument against it?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I went to Xerox PARC, Palo Alto Research Center in 1979, and I saw the early work on graphical user interfaces that they had done. And they had a mouse, and it was obvious that you needed a pointing device, and a mouse seemed to be the best one. We tried a bunch of other ones subsequently at Apple, and a mouse indeed was the best one. We refined it a little bit. We found that Xerox's had 3 buttons. We found that people would push the wrong button or be scared that they were going to push the wrong button, so they always looked at the mouse instead of the screen. So we got it down to 1 button so that you could never push the wrong button, and made some refinements like that. The Xerox mouse cost about $1,000 a piece to build. We had to engineer one that cost $20 to build. So we had to do a lot of those kinds of things, but the basic concept of the mouse came originally from a company called SRI through Xerox and then to Apple. And there were a lot of people at Apple that just didn't get it. We fought tooth and nail with a variety of people there who thought the whole concept of a graphical user interface was crazy. But
on what grounds?
On the grounds that it either couldn't be done, or on the grounds that real computer users didn't need menus in plain English, and real computer users didn't care about putting nice little pictures on the screen. But fortunately, I was the largest stockholder and the chairman of the company, so I won.
Steve Jobs is my guest, the co-founder of Apple Computer, now the head of Next Computer Incorporated, and also the head of Pixar Studios, which made Toy Story. Do you think that when you were ousted from Apple that people kind of wrote you off I mean, here you are with these big successes now.
Oh, golly, I don't know. I'm sure that a lot of people did, and that was fine. It was a very painful time, as you might imagine. So,
To be forced out of the company you created.
oh, of course,
Yeah.
it was a very painful time, and but you just march forward and you try to learn from it. And one of the things I always tried to coach myself on was not being afraid to fail. When you have something that doesn't work out, a lot of times people's reaction is to get very protective about ever wanting to fall on their face again, and I think that's a big mistake, because you never achieve what you want without falling on your face a few times in the process of getting there. So I've tried to not be afraid to fail, and matter of fact, I've failed quite a bit since leaving Apple.
Are you surprised at the problems Apple is having now, or did you see that coming?
I try not to talk about Apple too much, but what I will say is that the day I left Apple, we had a 10-year lead over Microsoft. And in the technology business, a 10-year lead is really hard to come by. It happens, maybe a company has that once every few decades, whether it be a Xerox or an IBM with mainframes. Apple had that with the graphical user interface. And the problem at Apple was that they stopped innovating. If you look at the Mac that ships today, it's 25% different than the day I left. And that's not enough for 10 years and billions of dollars in R&D. And it wasn't that Microsoft was so brilliant or clever in copying the Mac. It's that the Mac was a sitting duck for 10 years. And that's Apple's problem, is that their differentiation evaporated. And unlike Compaq or others who play in the Intel Microsoft standard space, where Compaq only has to be 5% better than its competitors for everyone to want to buy their computers, Apple has to be 50 or 100% better, because when you buy something that is out of the mainstream a little bit, you take a risk, and you want a much bigger reward for taking that risk. And unfortunately, that differentiation has not completely evaporated, but for the most part it has. And that's the predicament Apple's in now. And that's why cost cutting and other things at Apple are not going to be the cure. The cure for Apple is to innovate its way out of its current predicament. And there's a lot of good people left at Apple that are capable of doing that with the proper leadership, which is what's been missing.
Some Mac users are afraid that the Mac operating system is in danger of becoming obsolete in the way that beta video became obsolete because it was outdone by VHS. What do you think?
I think with the appropriate leadership at Apple, that's not going to happen. But I think we're going to have to wait and see.
Do you care? I mean, how still involved and vested do you feel in the future of Apple, the company you co-created?
I'm happy every time a Mac gets shipped. I still have people, sending me emails telling me how much they love their Macs. And it's sort of, how do you explain it? It's like the first person you were ever in love with, It's like your first love, and there will never be another one like it. And in my case, we were together for 10 years, and that's a long time. But, if you move on in your life, you can't always stay in love with your first girlfriend, right? So,
do you think that Apple would have been better off if it licensed its operating system to other companies, which it didn't do, and it's been criticized for?
Yeah,
until recently with Motorola. Yeah, you don't know.
Who knows?
Okay.
I have no idea.
Stephen Jobs co-founded Apple Computer. He's now the head of the software company Next, and he's the president of Pixar, the computer animation company that produced Toy Story. He'll be back in the second half of the show. I'm Terry Gross, and this is Fresh Air. What do you think the state of the computer would be if it weren't for Apple? This is a chance, I guess, for a really self-serving answer, but I'm really curious what you think.
I usually believe that if one group of people didn't do something, within a certain number of years, the Times would produce another group of people that would accomplish similar things. We happened to be at the right place at exactly the right time with the right group of people, and we did some wonderful work. I'm extraordinarily proud of the work that the team at Apple did when I was there. And I think that personally our major contribution was a little different than some people might think. I think our major contribution was in bringing a liberal arts point of view to the use of computers.
Yeah, explain what you mean by that.
What I mean by that is that, if you really look at the ease of use of the Macintosh, the driving motivation behind that was to bring not only ease of use to people so that many, many more people could use computers for non-traditional things at that time, but it was to bring, beautiful fonts and typography to people. It was to bring graphics to people, not for, plotting laminar flow calculations, but so that they could see beautiful, photographs or pictures or artwork, etc., to help them communicate what they were doing potentially. Our goal was to bring a liberal arts perspective and a liberal arts audience to what had traditionally been, a very geeky technology and a very geeky audience.
What made you think that more liberal arts direction was the direction to head in?
Because, in my perspective, and the way I was raised, was that that science and computer science is a liberal art. It's something that everyone should know how to use, at least, and harness in their life. It's not something that should be relegated to 5% of the population over in the corner. It's something that everybody should be exposed to. Everybody should have a mastery of to some extent, and that's how we viewed, computation or these computation devices.
And you think that, that concept really caught on in the whole industry? Eventually.
It's in the it's Apple certainly, that's the seed of Apple, computers for the rest of us. And I think the sort of the liberal arts point of view still lives at Apple. I'm not so sure that it lives that many other places.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the reasons I think Microsoft took 10 years to copy the Mac was because they didn't really get it at its core.
Do you think the PC as we know it is on the verge of changing?
That's a really big question. I think the PC as we know it's going to be around for quite some time, but the heart of the question is, are we entering a time window where we might see the first successful post-PC devices? Personal digital assistants or PDAs attempted to be that and failed. And the next attempt is going to be, I think, these very low-cost consumer internet appliances, which is, can somebody make a $300 box that hooks up to your television on one side and maybe hooks up to ISDN or a cable modem on the other side and allows you, for $300 to have a web browser on your TV and to access the entire internet. And I think that's entirely possible. And I think that we're going to see those devices soon, and hopefully some innovative marketing and distribution techniques surrounding those devices so that a lot of people can all of a sudden have an internet browser in their living room. And I think that's going to be very exciting. And I think that could be the beginning of the first real post-PC market.
I know at Apple there was, at least early on, a very informal, non-corporate type of atmosphere. I wonder if there are any lessons you learned about what worked and didn't work in the corporate lifestyle at Apple that you've applied to your current companies, Next and Pixar.
Well, I don't know what a corporate lifestyle is. I mean, Apple was a corporation. We were very conscious of that. We were very driven to make money so that we can continue to invest in the things we loved. I would say Apple was a corporate lifestyle, but it had a few very big differences to other corporate lifestyles that I'd seen. The first one was a real belief that that there wasn't a hierarchy of ideas that mapped into the hierarchy of the organization. In other words, great ideas could come from anywhere, and that we better sort of treat people in a much more egalitarian sense in terms of where the ideas came from. And Apple was a very bottoms-up company when it came to a lot of its great ideas. And we hired, truly great people and gave them the room to do great work. And a lot of companies, I know it sounds crazy, but a lot of companies don't do that. They hire people to tell them what to do. We hired people to tell us what to do. We figured we're paying them all this money. Their job is to figure out what to do and tell us. And that meant that led to a very different corporate culture, and one that's really much more collegial than hierarchical.
But in spite of this kind of different approach to the corporate hierarchy, it was probably still a very high-stress place.
Well, we were very young, and most of the folks were not married, and so they could work, 15-hour days. So you didn't have a typical situation where, you work so that you can support your life. Your work was your life in many cases.
Do you feel you've changed from that? Is that still your life?
I feel it is still my life, but it's not all my life.
Mm-hmm.
It's less of a percentage, but I still don't really, I've never been able to sort of think of my work and my life as different things. They're the same thing, but where it used to be, 99% of my life, it's, maybe 50% of my life now.
Speech at Palo Alto High School, what you follow with your heart will indeed come back to make your life much richer. Steve spoke at the Palo Alto High School graduation in June 1996.
I have been invited here today to address you as you leave high school, and in most cases your parents too, to venture out into the world on your own. I am supposed to offer you some wisdom and advice that you may remember along your travels. I will address my remarks to you, the students, rather than to your parents. It is proper that I do so, being that the only wisdom I have comes from my advanced age. Your parents are as old as I am, and much wiser, I am sure. However, I am wiser than you, and maybe you will listen to me more than you listen to your parents. Some of your parents may not agree or agree fully with what I will say today. This is okay. This is okay. I will simply be one of the first in your post-high school life to fill your head with ideas that they disagree with. Wait until you get to college. But in any event, if there is any discordance between what they have told you and what you hear from me today, rest assured that I am right. Be aware of the world's magical, mystical, and artistic sides. The most important things in life are not the goal-oriented, materialistic things that everyone and everything tries to convince you to strive for. Most of you know that deep inside. Think back on this spring, the last 3 or 4 months, when you are winding down high school, know where you are going next year, and begin to really have strong intuitions about the world you will encounter. Maybe you see an image of yourself in Paris, sculpting in an artist's studio as the setting sun shines in the paned windows. Maybe you're in India, running a hospital for poor children, and you hear the distant clatter of the outdoor marketplace in the early morning. Maybe you see yourself in a recording studio laying down a track for your album. Maybe you see yourself alone in a rented room at 4:30 in the morning, being the only person alive to understand a new law of physics you just figured out. Whatever it may be, I bet many of you have had some of these intuitive feelings about what you could do with your lives. These feelings are very real, and if nurtured, can blossom into something wonderful and magical. A good way to remember these kinds of intuitive feelings is to walk alone near sunset and spend a lot of time looking at the sky in general. We are never taught to listen to our intuitions, to develop and nurture our intuitions, But if you do pay attention to these subtle insights, you can make them come true. People will come at you with reasons why you shouldn't do these things. You can't make a living writing songs? Right. Just ask Bob Dylan. Helping children in India is nice, but you need to prepare for real life. Just ask Mother Teresa. You could be doing so much more with your life. You can hear Albert Einstein's parents encouraging him to get a real job when he was working a low-level job in the Swiss Patent Office rather than teaching in a university. so that he could stay up late at night working through his new ideas. If you don't have any of these feelings called dreams, then you're in trouble. Before you spend 4 or more years of your life going in a direction your heart may or may not want you to go, you need to recapture them. You need to recapture them. Be a creative person. Creativity equals connecting previously unrelated experiences. You have to have them to connect them. Creative people feel guilty that they are simply relaying what they see. How do you get a more diverse set of experiences? Not by traveling the same path as everyone else. I'll give you an example. The college I went to was a small liberal arts college in Portland, Oregon, named Reed College. It was, at that time, the center of a calligraphy revival movement in the US. I ended up taking a calligraphy course before I left college, and at the age of 18, was exposed to a totally new world of typography, graphic layout, font design, and the like. There was no hope of earning any income from this skill or knowledge, and some of my friends derided me for wasting my time and talents on learning how to write with fancy letters. However, years later, when we were designing Macintosh, it was this very same experience and set of insights which drove me to insist that we find a way to use proportionally spaced type and offer a range of fonts. In essence, to bring a much richer world of typography to the computer world than had ever existed before. And this also led to the LaserWriter printer, so that one could print these letter forms with the quality they deserved. And this set the stage for desktop publishing. I tell you truly, none of this would have ever happened at Apple if I had sacrificed that calligraphy class for a more substantive class of economics or engineering. So to be a creative person, you need to feed or invest in yourself by exploring uncharted paths that are outside the realm of your past experience. Seek out new dimensions of yourself, especially those that carry a romantic scent. But one has no way of knowing which of these paths will lead anywhere in advance. That's the wonderful thing about it in a way. The only thing one can do is to believe that some of what you follow with your heart will indeed come back to make your life much richer. And it will. And it will. And you will gain an ever firmer trust in your instincts and intuition. Don't be a career. The enemy of most dreams and intuitions, and one of the most dangerous and stifling concepts ever invented by humans, is the career. A career is a concept for how one is supposed to progress through stages during the training for and practicing of your working life. There are some big problems here. First and foremost is the notion that your work is different and separate from the rest of your life. If you're passionate about your life and your work, this can't be so. They will become more or less one. This is a much better way to live one's life. The risk factor quotient goes down as you encounter the real world. Many people find what they believe to be safe harbors, lawyers and accountants, only to wake up 10 or 15 years later and discover the price they paid. Make your avocation your vocation. Make what you love your work. The journey is the reward. People think that you've made it when you've gotten to the end of the rainbow and got the pot of gold. But they're wrong. The reward is in the crossing the rainbow. That the reward is in the crossing the rainbow. That's easy for me to say. I got the pot of gold, literally. But if you get to the pot of gold, you already know that that's not the reward, and you go looking for another rainbow to cross. Think of your life as a rainbow arcing across the horizon of this world. You appear, have a chance to blaze in the sky, then you disappear. The two endpoints of everyone's rainbow are birth and death. We all experience both completely alone. How many of you have seen the birth of another human? It is a miracle. And how many of you have witnessed the death of a human? It is a mystery beyond our comprehension. No human alive knows what happens to us upon or after our death. Some believe this, others that, but no one really knows at all. Again, most people of your age have not thought about these events very much. And it's as if we shelter you from them, afraid that the thought of mortality will somehow wound you. For me, it's the opposite. To know my arc will fall makes me want to blaze while I am in the sky. Not for others, but for myself. For the trail I know I am leaving. Now, as you live your arc across the sky, you want to have as few regrets as possible. Remember, regrets are different from mistakes. Mistakes are those things that you did and wish you could do over again. In some, you were a fool. Usually concerning women. Some mistakes are deep, others not. But if your intent was pure, they are almost always enriching in some way. So mistakes are things that you did and wish you could do over again. Regrets are most often things you didn't do and wish you did. I still regret not kissing Nancy Kinnaman in high school. Who knows what might have happened? Maybe she regrets it too.
Interview about Pixar to put these stories into the culture is a rare opportunity. On November 22, 1996, Steve Jobs discussed leading Pixar, his strategy for the studio's future, and the privilege of creating stories for future generations.
What kinds of things did you need to do, both personally, learning to become a filmmaker, and as a businessman, to put the company where it is today?
Well, Pixar is a studio. I am not a filmmaker. I do not direct our films. What I try to do is help create the environment where all these incredible people can make films. We've got a really unique thing in the industry, in that the very best creative people will only go to work at a few places. Disney, Pixar, possibly DreamWorks. In the same sense, the very best computer scientists in computer graphics will only go to work at a few places. Pixar is one of those, but most of the studios are not because they do not have our level of technical culture. I think Pixar is the only place in the world that can hire the best from both of these areas. And we have worked for 10 years to figure out a way to have them all work together, which is not easy because the Hollywood culture and the Silicon Valley culture are really different. We think we have picked the best from both.
I have heard that there are no contracts at Pixar, and that is different than a lot of Hollywood productions. What is the philosophy behind that?
In this blending of cultures, one of the things we encountered was that the Hollywood culture and the Silicon Valley culture each use different models of employee retention. Hollywood uses the stick, which is the contract, and Silicon Valley uses the carrot, which is the stock option. We examined both of those in really great detail, economically, but also psychologically and culture-wise. What kind of culture do you end up with? While there are a lot of reasons to want to lock down your employees for the duration of a film, because if somebody leaves, you are at risk. Those same dangers exist in Silicon Valley. During an engineering project, you do not want to lose people. And yet, Silicon Valley managed to evolve another system other than contracts. We prefer the Silicon Valley model in this case. Give people stock in the company so that we all have the same goal, which is to create shareholder value. But not having contracts also makes us constantly worry about making Pixar the greatest company we can, so that nobody would ever want to leave. When you sign a contract with somebody, you can sort of say, well, I do not have to worry about that person for 5 years. And if you are really sophisticated, you will have a database that reminds you 6 months before their contract is up, so you can start paying them more attention. They are the most important person in the world for 6 months. And then after they sign again, you put them in a drawer. Our system is a little different than that. Every single day, we worry about how we can make Pixar a better company so that nobody will ever want to leave. And so we do not take anybody for granted. If they do not want to be at Pixar, then probably they should leave anyway, whether or not they would ever have a contract. In technology and at Pixar on the creative side, you have got incredibly talented people who are also rare and in demand. If you do not treat them right, they can go get another job in 10 minutes. So a strange thing happens. The hierarchy of power sort of inverts, and the CEO is actually at the bottom. I sort of feel like I work for most of these people because they are the ones doing all the brilliant work. And it is the same in software. It is the same thing. The best people are very hard to come by, and so it is management's job to support them because they're on the front lines doing the work.
How is your relationship with Pixar different than Louis B. Mayer or some of the great studio heads who may not have been directors or producers themselves, but who certainly had a great deal to do with what was done?
Well, we are a small studio, and so we do not want to let any of this go to our heads. What we are trying to do is to build a great animation studio. We stay very focused on that. The other great animation studio is, of course, Disney, and they have done an incredible job. Feature animation is really at the heart of Disney. They have created all the character franchises that breathe life into the theme parks. And if you look at where Disney's profits come from, a tremendous amount of it is dependent on feature animation, as are the theme parks. What we are doing is just a pure play to build a feature animation studio. My role is to try to understand the pieces we need to put in place to do that, to work with everybody to attract and retain the people to do that, and to get a clear strategy in place. And I help with the relationships with Disney and other people. I enjoy it tremendously. We have got an incredible collection of people at Pixar. So I learn a lot. I like to get in there and help where I can. But my greatest joy is when we have people that are much better than I am at something, so I can forget about it, not worry about it, and get on to something else where I can help. Making an animated film is entirely different than making a live action film. When you make a live action film, a director typically shoots between 10 and 25 times as much footage as will end up on the screen. They take that into the editing room and build their film. And hopefully they can do a good job, because if they cannot, it is too late. The actors are gone. The sets are down. Walt Disney realized many decades ago that animation was so expensive that you could not afford to animate 10 times more than what you need. Matter of fact, you do not want to animate even 10% more than what you need. And therefore, the only conclusion you can come to is you have to edit your film before you make it. You have to edit your film before you make it. Disney pioneered a lot of techniques for doing that, and they have refined those over the last 60 years. Working with Disney gave us access to that wisdom that you cannot buy for love or money. The wisdom and experience of having made tens of feature animated films. And I think we learned a tremendous amount. 10 years ago, when we made the landmark short film Luxo Jr., it took about 3 hours on average to render each frame. Fast forward to today, computers are 100 times faster, and yet in Toy Story, it took 3 hours on average to render each frame. And the reason was the frames were 100 times more complex in many cases, and we are throwing between 5 and 10 times more computer power at our second feature film, Codename Bugs, than we did at Toy Story. And it will still take 3 hours to render each frame. Our ambitions visually are growing as fast as the technology can feed them. And so I think the visual worlds we will be able to create will be much richer over time. On the creative side, though, I think the art of storytelling is very old. And no amount of technology can turn a bad story into a good story. Storytelling is a real art. And that is something that we are always going to be working on. Very, very hard. I do not think it has changed in a long time, and I'm not sure it will. And I do not think it is something that the technology has anything to do with. You can hardly find an Apple II around too much anymore. You still can in schools, but that is about it. It is not clear whether you will be able to boot up Macintosh 5 years from now or not. All these technology boxes and all the software, it has a life of a year or two if you are very lucky. If it has a life of 5 years, it is extraordinary. And every once in a while, something has a life of 10 to 15 years. And I've been lucky to be associated with a few of those products as well. But sooner or later, they all become part of the sedimentary layer that is the foundation for new innovation. By contrast, Disney released its first animated feature film, Snow White, in 1937. That is 60 years ago. A few years ago, they released it on video and sold 28 million copies. making probably around $250 million of profits 60 years after its initial release. And I have a young son. We got Snow White, and he loved it. He watched it 30 or 40 times. And it really struck me that I know people on most of the continents of this world. And I think everyone I know knows the story of Snow White. I do not think I know one person who has not seen it. Watching my son watch this, it really hit me that these stories renew themselves with each generation of young children. You read Joseph Campbell. These are our myths. Here is something that is 60 years old that is regenerating itself in my son and other young children. And I think people are going to be watching Toy Story in 60 years, not because of the computer graphics, but because of the story about friendship. And that is something really amazing to me. Something very different than the industry I worked in the past. To have the opportunity to put these stories into the culture like this, if we can work really hard and be lucky again and again, is a rare opportunity. And I think everybody at Pixar feels really, really privileged to have this opportunity. Email to Pixar employees subject. The Pixar holiday waltz from Steve Jobs to Pixar employees date. December 12th, 1996, 4:03 p.m. I am told that around 40 of us are feeling uncomfortable about coming to the Pixar holiday waltz because we do not have a guest, or because we feel it is a hoity-toity affair that does not reflect who we are. I think very few of us belong to the waltz crowd, nor often attend formal affairs like this. My last waltz was 10 years ago. That is exactly why this promises to be so much fun. It is a chance to see ourselves and our colleagues in a strange costume, a tuxedo, doing a totally foreign activity. Waltzing. This may be your last chance during this lifetime to see your favorite technical director trying to dance in a tuxedo. As for being single, all I can say is that cutting in on a lovely lady or an elegant gentleman during a waltz is considered proper and flattering. You might also enjoy the food, the music, your friends, and the ambience. I do hope those of you who are not planning to attend reconsider joining your friends and colleagues at our Pixar Holiday Waltz. We will miss you if you do not come. What do you have to lose? You just might love it. Steve definition. Hoity-toity. Adjective, first used in 1690. 1. Thoughtlessly silly or frivolous. 2. Marked by an air of assumed importance. Highfalutin.
Interview, for in the company of giants, the worst thing that someone can do in an interview is to agree with me. In the 1990s, when Steve Jobs was running NeXT and Pixar, 2 Stanford Business School students won a lunch with him at a charity auction. They later interviewed him for a book profiling business leaders in technology.
You had better have great people, or you won't get your product to market as fast as possible. Or you might get a product to market really fast, but it will be clunky and nobody will buy it. There are no shortcuts around quality, and quality starts with people. Maybe shortcuts exist, but I am not smart enough to have ever found any. I spend 20% of my time recruiting even now. I spend a day each week helping people recruit. It is one of the most important things you can do.
If finding the players is so important, how can you tell who is a player and who isn't?
That is a very hard question. Ultimately, there are 2 paths. If a candidate has been in the workplace for a while, you have to look at the results. There are people who look so good on paper and talk such a good story, but they have no results behind them. They can't point to breakthroughs or successful products that they shipped and played an integral part in. Ultimately, the results should lead you to the people. As a matter of fact, that is how I find great people. I look at great results and I find out who was responsible for them. However, sometimes young people haven't had the opportunity yet to be in a position of influence to create such results. So here, you must evaluate potential. It is certainly more difficult, but the primary attributes of potential are intelligence and the ability to learn quickly. Much of it is also drive and passion. Hard work makes up for a lot. When you recruit, you are rolling the dice. No matter what, you are rolling the dice because you have only got an hour to assess the candidate. The most time I spend with somebody is an hour, and I must then recommend whether we hire the person or not. Others will recommend as well, so I won't be the only one, but I still have to throw my vote in the hat. Ultimately, it comes down to your gut feeling. Your gut feeling gets refined as you hire more people and see how they do. Some you thought would do well don't, and you can sense why. If you study it a bit, you might say, I thought this person was going to do well, but I overlooked this aspect, or I didn't think this person would do well, but they did. And here's why. As you hire people over time, your gut instinct gets better and more precise. Over time, my digging in during an interview gets more precise. For example, many times in an interview, I will purposely upset someone. I will criticize their prior work. I will do my homework, find out what they worked on, and say, God, that really turned out to be a bomb. That really turned out to be a bomb. That really turned out to be a bozo product. Why did you work on that? I probably shouldn't say this in your book, but the worst thing that someone can do in an interview is to agree with me and knuckle under. What I look for is for someone to come right back and say, you're dead wrong, and here's why. I want to see what people are like under pressure. I want to see if they just fold, or if they have firm conviction, belief, and pride in what they did. It is also good every once in a while to really piss somebody off in an interview to see how they react. Because if your company is a meritocracy of ideas with passionate people, you have a company with a lot of arguments. If people can't stand up and argue well under pressure, they may not do well in such an environment.
What do you think your weaknesses are when it comes to management?
I don't know. People are package deals. You take the good with the confused. In most cases, strengths and weaknesses are two sides of the same coin. A strength in one situation is a weakness in another, yet often the person can't switch gears. It is a very subtle thing to talk about strengths and weaknesses because almost always they're the same thing. My strength probably is that I have always viewed technology from a liberal arts perspective. As such, I have always pushed for things that pulled technology in those directions by bringing insights from other fields. An example of that would be with the Macintosh, desktop publishing. Its proportionately spaced fonts, its ease of use. All of the desktop publishing stuff on the Mac comes from books. The typography, that rich feel that nobody in computers knew anything about. I think that my other strength is that I am a pretty good judge of people and have the ability to bring people together around a common vision.
When are your strengths, judgment of character and liberal arts perspective, your weaknesses?
In certain cases, my weaknesses are that I am too idealistic. I need to realize that sometimes best is the enemy of better. Sometimes I go for best when I should go for better, and I end up going nowhere or backwards. I am not always wise enough to know when to go for the best and when to just go for better. Sometimes I am blinded by what could be versus what is possible. Doing things incrementally versus doing them in one fell swoop. Balancing the ideal and the practical is something I still must pay attention to. Email to Pixar employees subject. Apple acquires Next from Steve Jobs to Pixar employees date. December 20th, 1996, 9:24 p.m. Today. Apple announced that it is acquiring Next. This is great for Apple. It gives them a very advanced object-oriented operating system, OpenStep that can leapfrog Microsoft Windows. This is great for Next. OpenStep will become mainstream and be used by millions of people. This has been a dream of everyone at Next for 10 years. This is great for Pixar. It will free me up from running two companies so I can devote even more of my energies to Pixar. There may even be some possibilities for Pixar and Apple to work together in the future if creatively driven, and this is really great for me. I have been working with a group of wonderful colleagues at Next for over a decade, and having our work finally become mainstream will be very gratifying. A feeling everyone at Pixar already knows. I will be advising Apple on their product strategy, and I will get to spend even more of my time at Pixar. I am very happy and excited. Steve P.S. For more details, check out Next's website at uw.next.com.